Hey friends, it's me, Miss P. Today I want to introduce you to an artist named Giorgio De Chirico. There is a lot that goes in with the history of his work and sort of how it intersected with politics at the time. But right now I would just like to start by giving you a basic description of what his artwork is like when he made it and a little bit about his early life. So, Giorgio De Chirico was born in Greece. And he lived in Greece for quite a while, actually. His mother was Greek, and his father was Italian. His father was there for a railroad building project in Greece, and they lived there for quite a while. And Giorgio De Chirico actually studied at the Athens Polytechnic School in that time, starting in 1900, I think, when he was 12. A couple of years later, the De Chirico family began to move around Europe a little bit before finally settling in Italy, where he started the phase of his work which would be the most influential and the most recognized, which was the Scuola de Metafisica. And he really got right into this movement pretty early in, and he was still very young at this point. In 1910, he was only 22. But in this period of time, he would make the paintings that I would say are the most popular from his career. What he meant by the school of the metaphysical was to paint things sort of below the surface. He talked about having an eye for recognizing all the little details and nuances. And when he says details and nuances and revealing, he might not necessarily mean something that's hiding in the picture, like if you look long enough, you can see this thing. It's just, you would put symbols together and maybe they'd make you think of something else. Some symbols that he used pretty frequently in his artwork would be he had these really big spanning skies. Sometimes they were blue and sometimes they were darker, gray or whatever. There would be long, stretching expanses of flat, sort of barren ground where nothing was growing. It would be like yellowy sand colored. He used a lot of Greek architecture in his works, as well as Greek statues, influenced by his earlier life in Greece. He also used a lot of trains, some figures that sometimes looked like mannequins, sometimes looked like people, sometimes were a little bit in between, sometimes the figures were shadowy. Generally, the painting had these feelings of mystery, and they are a little bit creepy if you look at some of them. I still think they're really cool. I am showing you De Chirico specifically because I feel like these long flat surfaces that he makes are really good for talking about perspective. And when you have big open expanses where you can see where the sky meets the ground and the horizon line, and you can see all these buildings extending back towards the horizon line, obviously, it's going to be a good example to use perspective. So that's really why I am talking about Giorgio De Chirico. Another cool thing about Giorgio De Chirico is he came before a very famous art movement that happened later in the 1920s. I mean, he was still alive at that point, but he was focusing more on a different kind of art than the Scuola de Metafisica. He was a big inspiration for surrealist painters. Now, surrealist painting is a pretty popular movement of art. If you've ever heard the name Salvador Dali, he is a surrealist painter. He painted the persistence of time, which is that painting that you've probably seen with all the melting clocks. And you'll notice in his paintings that there are also like big open expanses of yellow sand and dirt and just flat areas of land. And again, surrealism is a lot about not looking into your mind and kind of finding the symbolic, the unreal. So a lot of times their paintings won't represent what you think they see in reality. That being said, they're not Cubist art either, which was also coming up in the time. There were a lot of art movements that were happening right around this time, and I feel like De Chirico was right in the middle of it all. So by the time the Surrealists found his work in 1920, De Chirico had actually taken a turn and decided that instead of what he was doing, he would like to have a return to order. which basically what he meant by that was he wanted to study like the art of old times. You'll think of all the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Those were the kind of artists that De Chirico wanted to look at and study from now on, which seemed like almost a little bit like a change because what he was doing before seemed so different than all of the Renaissance art that was produced before he made his work. He continued to paint, and his paintings are still good. I think they're not nearly as good as time goes on. I mean, they're still good. He does a lot of self portraits, and he did some work designing sets for plays. But most of the famous work that you'll see from Giorgio De Chirico is from the early period of his life. So we're going to take all those things into consideration, looking at the colors he uses, the shapes he uses, all of those different things when we're going to be making this next piece of art. So hopefully soon we can get to that.